Why Isn't Becky Twitchel Dead? A Tom and Scott Mystery, Book 2. Author Mark Richard Subro. Publisher St. Martin's Press, New York. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 4. Paul and I stood alone in the dim hallway. Under his Grover Cleveland High School letterman's jacket, he wore a bulky knit sweater that had a row of reindeer prancing merrily from shoulder to shoulder. He wore tight black pants and gleaming white high-top basketball shoes. "I came back to get my gym bag." He held up the item mentioned. His soft, deep voice thrummed through the corridor. He stood at least 6'5" and weighed 220 pounds. I remember seeing Paul as a skinny 6-foot freshman. He spent that year quietly and meekly. Then his voice had stopped squeaking. He'd grown 5 inches, gained 7 pounds, and now as a senior was president of the class and co-captain of the football team. Now boys flocked around him and girls swooned. I couldn't figure out what a kid with so much going for him saw in Becky Twitchel. In the dimly lit hallway, he avoided making eye contact. I explained about helping Jeff. "Anything you can tell me about Sunday's party might help," I said. He shifted his books from his right hand to his left. He whispered, "I can't." "You're a friend of his. Don't you want to help him?" "Yeah." He returned his books to his right hand, leaned one elbow on the trophy case, and rubbed his face with his other hand. "Did you talk to the police?" He nodded. "Something going wrong with them?" "Yeah, no." He peered at me, looking away. I pondered on how to break through his teenage reticence. Obviously something was wrong. I let the silence build. "Man, this is too much." He paused. Silence ticked away. "Lots of the kids say you can be trusted, that you've helped some of the guys out of tough situations and didn't tell their parents." I confirmed his statement with a nod. Suddenly he bashed the flat of his hand against the glass of the trophy case. "Everybody has to get off my back." He gave me an agonized look. "Who's on your back?" "My parents, Becky, Mr. Montini, the police, you." "I didn't do anything. Jeff killed her." He gave me a horrified look. "Shit," he muttered. He swung his head from side to side. "This is too much." I let a few moments of silence develop, then asked, "You didn't tell the police that you think he killed her?" "I didn't lie." "You didn't tell all." He nodded. "Why do you think he killed her?" Jesus, I can't squill on a friend. His knuckles on the hand clutching his book shone whitely, his shoulders hunched with tension. I said, "I'm willing to listen. I'd like to help." He gazed at me, turned his back to the wall, and slid down it until his ass rested on the tile floor. He spread his legs, slumped his rear a foot from the wall, closed his eyes, and softly set his books on the floor next to him. "Okay," he mumbled. I sat down opposite him, our feet perhaps 10 inches apart. I felt the cold of the floor on my ass. "Probably dirty." He sighed. The red of the exit sign made the side of his head towards the doors glow, oddly. "Tell me about Sunday's party." He described an average teenage party. A little beer, and under prodding from me, he admitted, a few drugs. A few guys from the team and their girlfriends got together every Sunday. They went to his house to watch football games because his parents never bothered them, and he had the whitest screen television. About Jeff and Susan, he was specific. "They had a big fight even before they left my house Sunday." "What about?" "It started because she wanted him to take her to a dance next week. He wouldn't go. Jeff got stubborn like he always does. Usually he acts like a jerk, then agrees to go. She used to have to nag endlessly to get him to do anything. He didn't like to do stuff." "I thought Susan was a quiet girl." "Not this year. She wanted to do everything and go everywhere. Said she wanted to make her senior year count, make up for lost time." "What did they actually say to each other that night?" "We were all kind of teasing him. The girls, Becky especially, were after him. I was too. I mean, we were friends, teammates all these years, but he could be such a jerk." He fiddled with the cover of his American Government in Action textbook, his fingernail working on a loose corner, drawing the cover picture away from the binding. "So what happened?" "Sunday, he acted jerkier than usual. He wouldn't say anything, just kept asking Susan to leave with him, way before everybody else wanted to go. How were they when they left? Pissed. Susan especially. Jeff practically dragged her out. He was really mad. I could tell. People yelled, especially Becky, trying to get him to let Susan alone. But she left with him. I think maybe she didn't want to be the only girl at the party without a boyfriend. They were angry, but why would that make you think he killed her? The stuff they yelled at each other. Like what? He gulped. Like Susan dared Jeff to hit her, said he couldn't talk without hitting her. Dumb stuff, but I think she meant it. When she said that to him, he swung at her, but he missed. He tried to swing again, but I grabbed him until he cooled down. They'd walked to the car, still arguing. Susan shouting that she wasn't going to be a doormat. Jeff telling her to listen to him for once. You and Jeff were pretty good friends. I was his best friend on the team, but I've got lots of friends. I think he only had a couple. He's a good player. We got along. He knows a lot about sports. We've gone to a few Bulls games together. What did you think of Jeff and Susan's relationship before Sunday? Okay, I guess. They had their little arguments, but he shrugged. Why not tell all this to the police? If the cops thought Jeff and Susan had a fight, they'd be more likely to think Jeff did it. You can't tell on your friends. I've never done it. If anybody ever told on me, I'd pound the crap out of them. Besides, who wants to be involved in a hassle like this? What about Becky? How does she see all of this? Sometimes I don't understand her. He gave me a look of teenage wistfulness. I saw what he must have looked like as a 3 or 4-year-old general, gently puzzling over a butterfly emerging from a cocoon. He continued, She was on the phone right away Sunday night, telling me we couldn't tell about the fight. She said we shouldn't rat on our friends. She said everybody would know if we cooperated with the police. That sounds stupid, I said. I guess. He looked sheepish. I was kind of confused. He gave me a weak smile. Nobody I know has ever been murdered. He shook his head. But won't telling you all this make it worse for Jeff? I mean, all this is bad stuff. How will it help him? I don't know yet, but I think the truth usually helps more than lies. I wasn't sure I bought that completely, but it was the correct teacherly thing to say. For the moment, I thought for a minute. You didn't see either Jeff or Susan the rest of the night? No. You and the coach today at noon, I began. He interrupted. That was about the team and our next game. You going to be eligible? I got a confused look from him. Why shouldn't I be? My lowest grade's a C in calculus. I mumbled a disclaimer to him while considering the lie that either he, Montoni, or both had told me. Were Becky and Susan good friends? I asked. I guess all those girls sort of hung out together. Best friends one day, catty bitches the next. Kind of typical girls. He paused. Can I leave? I have to be home. I let him go. I'd called Scott from the school's office, asking him to pick me up at 6. His lone car sat in the parking lot as I walked out the door. We stopped at my place, barely managed to keep from burning some leftovers, and ate them. Over dinner, I told Scott about George and drugs. Scott asked whether I was going to turn him in. I thought about it. However, George didn't do drugs on school grounds as far as I knew, and he didn't go to school doped up. I didn't see him as some mad fiend addict mugging kids for their lunch money. After dinner, we drove to Mrs. Trask's. Events had moved too quickly the day before to talk with her as much as I'd wanted. Mrs. Trask lived a mile north of the police station in the oldest section of River's Edge, off 159th Street. The house stood on a slight rise with a 20-foot front yard and only a bare patch of dirt for a backyard. Snow had been meticulously shoveled from all the sidewalks and the driveway. I saw Eric's candy apple red Corvette in the driveway. I could check with him about my car before we left. Mrs. Trask met at the front door. She was dressed in blue jeans and a black sweater, both of which bagged indecorously on her as usual. Distant hard rock music indicated the presence of Eric somewhere in the house. We passed through the living room, which contained countless mismatched knickknacks and ordered rows on the floor-to-ceiling shelves that covered 3 walls. Not a speck of dust sat on any of them. The paraphernalia ranged from cheap kids' dinosaurs to pet Snoopies, to little men whose heads bobbed in the breeze. Few of them seemed to rise above the level of bargain basement specials. A soundless television showed Vanna White twirling letters. We sat in the kitchen. No knickknacks here, but the pattern of neatness continued. I introduced Scott. She vaguely recognized the name, but made no comments. She probably wasn't up on sports. I asked for the latest on Jeff. Not much. The lawyer said he's still trying to get bail. She offered us beer as we sat at the kitchen table. She stood leaning her ample back end against a sink. I'm not sure that lawyer knows what he's doing, she said. I know it's not supposed to be like Judge Wapner's courtroom, but I just don't understand what the problem is. I know my boy didn't kill her. The police won't tell me anything, and when I try to talk to the lawyer on the phone, he's always in meetings. I have a right to know what's going on. We commiserated on the cruelties of the system. I glanced around at the avocado-colored refrigerator, pale pink drapes, and gleaming white linoleum. I explained what I'd done so far that day and tried to help Jeff. She said, It's hard for me to believe that any of them could do such a thing. I've known most of them since grade school. When I was a room mother, Susan was the first girl Jeff ever loved. When he was in 8th grade, he always seemed to take girls so seriously. But he was shy. Of course, in these last couple years, he hasn't talked to me much. All teenagers are like that, but a mother knows when her boy's in love. I asked about Jeff and Mr. Trask. She went on a 7-minute tirade about the man I'd seen her pounding to a pulp the day before. She explained that he did everything to drive the children away from her. After she wound down about him, I got her back on the subject of the kids. Paul Conlon and Jeff have played together since kindergarten. They've had all the fights and scrapes 2 boys do. They used to be pretty equal in sports, but then Paul just shot past him. I hate those games. I don't understand what they're trying to do. I watch, but I'm hopeless. Jeff is a good athlete, so I encourage him. I try to get to as many of his games as I can. Eric bounced into the room, saw us, and gave a breezy greeting. He only paused a second or two when I introduced Scott. His reaction was, Wow, cool. The guys at the garage won't believe I met you. He stood at the open refrigerator, extracted a half-gallon of milk, and over his mother's protest, chugged a few gulps directly from the carton. He wore a heavy pea coat. On his way out, he told me he'd be sure to get to my car tomorrow. I managed to stop him long enough for him to agree to talk to me at school around 4 o'clock. The next day, he told me he'd drive the car over if it was finished. Then he left. Mrs. Trask sighed. They don't listen to me. She offered us another beer, but we declined. We moved to the living room from the corner of a sagging couch. I observed the filled shelves. Amid the paraphernalia, I saw portraits of her kids. I recognized them as school photos in cheap frames. Mrs. Trask eased her bulk into an imitation leather chair and shook her head. I feel most sorry for that Paul Conlon, she said. He's such a sad boy. He's popular, smart, and his dad's rich, I said. That don't mean nothing. He's a sad boy. My husband is a fool, but Paul's parents are worse. They have no idea what a good son they have. She saw the doubt on my face. No, he's not one of the ones likely for you ever to help. She paused and told about an incident 6 years ago. On a rainy summer night, Paul had walked to the Trask home. The boys had lost the baseball championship game that afternoon before it rained. All the parents had crammed into the stands. Paul's parents and Mr. Trask screaming at the boys. The coach, each other. Mrs. Trask was afraid there'd be a fight. Paul struck out every time he batted, which included the last out with the bases loaded, she finished. Paul had been the star of the team all season. All they could do was scream his name. Her beefy arms thumped the side of the chair. This was before I divorced that son of a bitch. He was out that night with the boys, buying an ice cream. Paul came to our house, still in his baseball uniform, dirty streaks of tears on his face. He didn't say anything. We sat on the front porch. I held him as he cried. What kind of parents make a 12-year-old that miserable? They pressured those kids every minute for years with this sports junk, she shuddered. I don't mean to insult you, Mr. Carpenter, you're being a sports person and all, but really, Scott told her that he understood. I know he did. We talked before about the pressure from coaches and parents. Mine had been okay, fortunately, but his dad had been among the worst of the ranters and ravers. One time he'd beaten up Scott's Little League coach for what Scott's dad considered to be a wrong choice for his boy. Mrs. Trask continued, and poor Becky Twitchel. This I set up for. Nobody had ever expressed even the slightest positive feeling for Becky, and here was someone feeling sorry for her. The girl is sick, Mrs. Trask said. That sounded more like everybody else. I tried for years to keep her away from these boys. She's smarter and cleverer than me. I've tried and tried. She shook her head. I guess I do hate her, although I know that's wrong. I'll have to go to confession about that, but it's true. When the boys told lies, lots of times it was to cover for Becky. If the kids were unhappy, it was because Becky got her way. Roger she found funny. Doris was a delightfully helpful girl. We talked a while longer, but we learned all we could from her. As we retrieved our coats from the hall closet, she said, "You're not the only teacher that cares at that school. That coach, Mr. Wyndham, called to talk to Eric. He told me how sorry he was about everything. It's nice to know people at school care." Maybe George did care, but I hadn't noticed anything in him besides selfish irresponsibility. And why talk to Eric? Maybe I'd find out tomorrow. Before we left, I assured her I'd talk to the lawyer in the morning about bail for Jeff. As we stood at the door, her eyes filled with tears. She took my hand. "You've got to help," she pleaded. "You're my boy's only hope." I assured her as best I could. The bitter cold, driven by a 20-mile-an-hour east wind, tore through us as we hurried to the car, rubbing gloved hands together as that car warmed up. I asked, "Have we got time to get to the hospital to see Neil before visiting hours close?" "It's supposed to start snowing any time, but yeah, we probably got time," Scott said. We took LaGrange Road to the Stevenson Expressway and drove to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I called earlier in the day, but Neil'd been asleep. A quick visit would be enough. He's been a leading gay activist for years. We'd worked on several committees together in the early 80s to get the police to stop harassing gay bars and to get the gay rights ordinance passed in Chicago and Illinois. Neil could have a vicious tongue. When I first introduced him to Scott, Neil used to condescend cruelly to him. Neil tended to look down on anyone who didn't have an advanced degree from a prestigious university. Today they existed in uneasy truth with each other. By luck, we found a parking place in Chicago Avenue in front of the National Guard Armory, about a block from the hospital. We made a short dash through the cold, down Fairbanks, and into the hospital. A half hour before visiting hours ended, we found his room on the 4th floor, having left a gentle stir behind us when one of the nurses on duty recognized Scott. We found Neil awake, alone, and bitchy as hell. "Salvation, take me away," he commanded when he saw us. "They're poisoning me." One leg lay in traction. He had a private room, of course. His wealth earned him that much. I looked at the still uncleared remnants of dinner, swirls of muck awash between green lumps. "It's just hospital food," I offered. He rolled his eyes. He complained for the better part of 10 minutes about life, the world, the lack of cute male nurses, the Herodins who did take care of him, the demeaning hospital gowns, the awful schedule, waking up too early. "You can't be that badly hurt," I said. This provoked an extensive listing of a variety of aches, pains, bumps, and bruises. Besides the leg, his only obvious wounds were nasty bruises, deepening to ugly black eyes. "What happened?" I asked. He gave us back an angry look. "Fag bashers. Those fucking heterosexual straight teenagers who need to take out their macho instincts as a large herd against lonely gay men. Fucking little bastards." I got the actual story with only a few more tirades thrown in. It wasn't much different from any other fag-bashing story. 4 or 5 kids, he still wasn't sure how many, had attacked him outside a gay bar. He'd blown his police whistle, tried to run, fought like mad, and all to no avail. I managed to land a few punches. He licked his lips. I nearly twisted the dick and balls of one of the little motherfuckers. I think that's when they broke my leg. I gave descriptions to the cops, but I'm sure they'll never catch the little no-neck monsters. They never do, he sighed dramatically. Ever the martyr, he'd milk this for as much sympathy as he could get. Scott and I seldom get hassled by fag bashers. I suspect it's because we're big enough to give pause to all but the stupidest attackers. We talked for a while, found that his pride was hurt, more than his physical self. Before retracing our steps to my place, we cruised up Michigan Avenue with the newly fallen snow. The thousands of lights strung on the trees along the avenue took on a glow beyond their usual magnificence. We could have stayed at Scott's in the city, but I had work the next day, and I didn't have a car for the drive to the suburbs. He had an engagement at noon at the Palmer House to speak to a boys' club. While we'd been talking to Neil, the snow had started. They'd predicted around 2 inches as we drove past Orland Square Mall. I saw Scott staring fixedly into the rearview mirror. "We're being followed," he said. I sat up and looked back. "You sure?" "Those same headlights have been behind us since 111th Street. Maybe before. They slow down and speed up when I do. Maybe they're following your tracks to keep on the road. They don't look like they've been plowed." While there wasn't much snow, the wind was up and drifts formed quickly in racing swirls on the roadway. Through the rear window, I watched a semi-truck barreling toward us from the distance. It rushed past our follower, came up fast and rocketed past us, raised new swirls of whiteness. "Stupid son of a bitch is going to end up in a ditch," Scott said. I watched the headlights behind us. They followed sedately. "This is ridiculous," I said. "We don't do car chases. A blazing rush down the highway in the middle of winter is not something I want to try." I looked back again. "I'd like to find out who it is, though. Let's pull into a gas city on 191st Street. They'll have to make a choice by then. They can't hide with all that light." They'll have to make a choice by then. They can't hide with all that light. They made their decision before then, however. As we neared Interstate 80, the other car sped up. They pulled even with us as we crossed over the expressway. I saw dim figures in a dark car, but nothing else. They swerved toward us. Scott only tapped the brakes. Still, we hit an icy patch. Our car swung toward the bridge railing. Scott twisted the wheel. I grabbed onto the dashboard. The other car was now ahead of us. Its own acceleration and swerve toward us caused its drivers to fight for control. I watched it swing over both lanes. Scott had the Porsche righted, continuing to tap the brakes. For a few seconds, we did a 300 horsepower ballet. The brakes responded for a moment, then we began another skid. We traveled sideways for 50 feet toward the other car. I watched as its driver righted his car and sped off. Scott pulled the Porsche under control, 3 feet from the brink of hurtling over the bridge onto the highway below. We sat in silence a moment. "Thank Christ the idiot in the semi isn't around," Scott said. He U-turned at 191st Street and drove back toward my place. When I looked, no one followed us. I hadn't recognized anyone in the other car, nor was I able to make out the license plate number. I leaned my head back against the top of the seat. I let the furry cushion comfort me. "Let's go home," I said. "I need a long workout and a hot shower." Working out is one of the sexiest turns-on for both of us. I still fit into the gym shorts I wore when I played sports in high school. Scott's in great shape by profession. When we started, the irons felt cold to the touch. In 10 minutes, the chill wore off. In 20 minutes, the sweat flowed pleasingly. In half an hour, Scott's sweatpants clung to his crotch in warm, sensuous folds. The basement was too cool to linger in, however. After showers, we reclined on the couch in the living room in t-shirts, jockey shorts, and white gym socks. He's one of the few men I've seen whose briefs fit snugly around his ass. I turned one lamp on low, inserted a Judy Collins CD, and laid down with my head in his lap. He smelled damp and clean and sexy. I caressed the hairs on the arm he draped over my chest. I left the curtains on the picture window up and open so we could watch the storm howl to its heart's content. Judy sang sweet and soft. I still go to her concerts every time she comes to Chicago. Scott said, "I was afraid we'd lose it for a minute there." "I had absolute faith in you and the car." "I'm also glad we've got the security system here. I'd be even more glad if we were staying at my place." "I guess we should have. I didn't think there'd be danger. Besides, we don't know if it's connected to the murder. It could have been some idiot teenager getting a few kicks. I hope that's all it was, he said. He ran his fingers under the waistband of my shorts. I rubbed my face against the blonde down on his stomach. Gay Mysteries Audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.